I've always loved brainstorming with other writers and consider having my work critiqued a part of that brainstorming. J. Asher.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses.
This episode, we are going to get into the world of working with other writers.
This is an expansion of what we talked about last episode of writing in other media. A lot of those other mediums are working with other authors and other creatives in a lot of different ways.
So if you get into, say, screenwriting, there's no way to screenwrite for a movie by just yourself. You're going to have to collaborate with other writers.
And this doesn't just mean movies or a book here and there.
There's all sorts of ways that you can work with other authors. Consider some of the books that you've seen on the shelf at the bookstore. Some of the times you'll see a collaborative book with a popular author and a less well-known author. And it's to kind of help bring that less-known author into the spotlight.
Yes. I actually talked to a best-selling author that I communicate with on social media about this. Her name is Tosca Lee. I was first introduced to her because she co-authored a book with Ted Decker, whom you guys have heard me talk about before. I was introduced to her and have since enjoyed reading her work through co-authoring and the opportunities that brought to her. And I talked to her about what it takes to co-author, because we in The Forge have talked about co-authoring and working together to write something as a writing club. Nothing has come of that yet, but it's on my writing club bucket list. When I did talk to Tosca Lee, she said that the best advice she could give for co-authoring is to play to your strengths. Know everybody's strengths and make sure your story and make sure your process plays to everybody's strengths.
Co-authoring can be a very difficult thing because you're working with different styles, you're working with different schedules. So if you have someone who's a plotter trying to work with the pantser, you might struggle a little.
Maybe just a little bit.
So if I were to co-author with Lee, a plotter who also focuses very much on action, we would probably do a mix of action and fantasy. She would plot the story, and I would fill in the gaps. Because I'm a pantser, I like to be verbose in my writing. And so we would play to her strengths of being able to lay out a storyline, and my strengths of being able to describe.
And add detail and strength to whatever particular moment is going on. But if this ever happens, I'm claiming every fight scene because with your...
Oh, you have? Yeah, that's all you.
Like, as an action author, brevity is highly important. Momentum is highly important. And keeping those fight scenes as fast as possible is really difficult in a fantasy writing style.
As Brandon Sanderson says, fantasy authors struggle with brevity.
Yes, you are exactly that.
But I could also very easily build a good detailed magic system that you might struggle with a little bit more. This is what I'm good at. This is what she's good at. Let's put these things together and make a really good thing that we couldn't do on our own.
As fantastic as the concept is, it's really difficult to co-author a book. Now, if you listen to, I believe it was during our September episodes, we talked a little bit about alpha beta readers and the strengths of having both names, but getting there is the hard part.
Because I may not agree with your particular penchant for hand-to-hand combat. Because I personally think that the more ranged you can be, the better. So we might struggle a little bit in the details figuring out the story. But it's all a great exercise in learning from each other.
We also talked earlier this month about pen versus keyboard. I'm going to write most of my book by hand before it ever sees a computer. And that becomes very difficult if we're co-authoring and you can't read my handwriting.
It is a great thing that we have resources like Google Docs, where you can edit live with each other, have a chat going. So there's technology that makes co-authoring easier. But if you want to co-author, find someone that works with your style and be patient. Be willing to compromise and just see where things go.
I'd say that's true of any working with anybody else, is their input is as valuable as yours. You want to also be careful of workload. You don't want one person coming up with ideas and the other being the only one to type it down. That's actually a different type of co-authoring. Most people call it ghostwriting.
Ghostwriting is when one person has an idea for a book, but they need help getting it down onto paper. So you may run into somebody like, say, a pastor who's used to giving presentations vocally, who, when they're putting together their sermons, it may just be bullet points and an outline, not a full scripted thing. So when they want to get these sermons that they present into a book, they might struggle with the actual wording and getting it down on the page. So they'll go to a ghostwriter.
I actually considered petitioning ghostwriting for a fictitious character. One of my favorite TV shows, which is now off the air, is called Castle, and the main character is a best-selling mystery novelist. I considered ghostwriting something just as fan fiction, ghostwriting something by Richard Castle, because it would be a lot of fun to do. Never ended up going down that route. I'm not a fan fiction writer by nature. But that's another form of ghostwriting, is if you're writing something for somebody who doesn't actually exist.
Another great way to work with other writers is a writing club. We've had members of the Forge on before to share their stories, but it is a great opportunity for us to collaborate, to work with each other, to brainstorm and get ideas. You don't have to co-author, you don't have to ghostwrite to work with other writers. Simply talking with other writers is working with them.
And that's actually what our quote at the beginning of this episode was about, was brainstorming.
I can't tell you how much the writing group has helped me in my work in progress. Without their opinions and their ideas and their suggestions on how to improve, my book would be nowhere near where it is right now in quality. So last episode, we talked about screenwriting, writing other mediums. This is probably the most common place you'll have for working with other writers.
Especially TV shows or people writing something in serial, because I will write this episode primarily, and then you and Crystal will write the next episode, and then Sue will write that one after that. We all are writing the same characters. We're all writing the same style. It has to be believed across all of the episodes, but you have to distribute the workload somehow.
The best way to write with other authors in this kind of form is to work with each other and find the voice for the characters together. There's one show that I remember watching, seeing a couple episodes of. It drove me nuts because you could tell every episode that there was a different writer because the voice of the characters changed so much. The words that they used felt very forced because it didn't feel like the character from the rest of the series, because it was just this one writer that threw in curse words every once in a while.
Can you imagine being that actor? They have to be the one to bring the whole character together and convey it in an interesting and believable format, when it feels like they're almost playing different characters every episode.
So it's very important to work with each other to find that voice for the characters.
If you and I were to write for a TV series, if the characters are fleeing from a bounty hunter, I would write that episode. If they're fleeing from a mythical monster with superpowers, you would write that episode. We would sit across the table from each other and talk about it and go, okay, well, then this can happen, then this can happen. We'd take notes. We'd make sure we get all of those pieces down. If the character falls in love, we're giving that episode to Crystal. We all have an idea of what's happening in each other's episodes, but the work itself will belong to each of us separately. And that goes back to playing to each other's strengths.
And when you're working with other writers, you have to remember what they're writing as well. Because if you don't consider their sections while you're writing your sections, it's not going to be a cohesive thing.
On that note of stage writing, screenwriting, understanding what you aren't writing is just as important. So I know there is going to be a magic battle across the field at some point. I'm not even going to try to write it, but what I'm not writing is an acknowledgement of your skill in that category.
Having that kind of a setup, that kind of a system where you're able to play to your strengths, write what you know how to write. You still get to do that one thing that we always tell you to do.
Write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.